How are we doing, Kansas Jayhawks basketball fans? This is your host, Nick Rondeau, here bringing you Jayhawks Daily. And we're here to talk about some point guards today. Nothing special, just kind of came upon my mind. Oh, yeah, and by the way, Talon Kinney committed to the Kansas Jayhawks. Yes, that's right. Talon Kinney, TK, chooses the Jayhawks for the 2026 season. The number one point guard recruit decided to make his announcement, live on CBS college basketball YouTube channel. He had his whole family up there. He had, performed this in his what was his old high school in his hometown of Newport, Kentucky. And just kind of getting everyone's hopes up. He had all the hats out there, all of his own 6-7 branded waters out in front of every single one of the hats, giving them all a fair chance. Come back to his hometown, get the hopes up. The host even, I believe it was a member of administration at his high school, mentioned the hometown ties multiple times. Just hey Talon, what's your commitment? And he put on a nice little montage, an interesting video. Kind of showing his hardships, his battles, some highlights, some tweets, and it ended with him breaking open the jacket, showing the KU Jayhawks on the shirt. The lights turned on. His whole family's got Kansas Jayhawks shirts on, and he puts on the hat, and Jayhawks fans go wild. So you cannot be upset getting another amazing recruit in Talon Kinney. And kind of to talk about, some of the key takeaways just from the actual presser and, given his, announcement. It is pretty huge. And, he kind of made it very clear. Bill Self made it obvious. He made it very intentional by throwing the keys, saying, "This is the keys to the castle." He brought that up again. He said he threw me the keys and come here for 10 months and then go to the next step, because he knows that's what it's going to take. He knows he's that talented of a player. He'd be in the NBA. We don't need to be naive anymore. These are the one and dones. And sometimes you just have to be honest with the coach and say, I expect it to go on. And if the coach completely agrees, Bill Self knows I'm never one to keep someone from going to the league. So boom, 10 months. And he even mentioned it again, didn't in this presser, but a huge reason was, Darren Peterson bought in. He's fully bought into the Jayhawks is the developmental program that I would want to go to before making that next step, that transition. And, Talon Kinney saying the exact same thing. Bill Self he said he needed me for 10 months. I'm going to be the guy. He said, I'm going to be the dog. That's just incredible amount of respect level that you can have for such a young player. He is a true freshman. And, this new age with college basketball, it's kind of difficult to, there are so many redshirting COVID years. A true freshman these days, actually showing up at 18 years old and also being given, the reins, it's going to be rare to see. So I'm very excited. And, he mentioned again, kind of a big reason was the staff and a huge hire in Jacques Vaughn, last May. That was just a huge connection to get there. And he didn't say I had a connection before, and he just said, how can I not want a guy who's had tenured success in development in the NBA, and now I'm going to be coached by him day by day, along with the best college basketball coach in Bill Self. So I think this was honestly for him, it became by the end after their recent visits kind of a no-brainer. And, how can you not be excited? You go from DP 22 to TK. We're not sure what the number will be. Maybe 13, maybe 4. Who knows? It's, I'm just throwing darts at a wall right now. But, he's going to be the guy no matter what. And that's going to make a huge impact on some of these other commitments that we'll be getting in the near future. Hopefully, obviously, in the near future. Definitely the guys that they're targeting, because, who's going to complement Talon Kinney best? It's going to be a rim runner. And, we're going to have probably a lot, hopefully, these guys stay. We had a pretty big freshman class. The transfers were, one-and-done type transfers. They were on their grad or senior year. So it's going to be very interesting to see who we can kind of pair with Talon Kinney, how talented those guys will be. But I definitely think we've got to be intentional about finding a good rim runner, finding an athletic big man that can really work with him, but also finding a great guard that could play really well with him, a good shooter, a really talented, off-ball type player more, because Talon Kinney is kind of that off, he's kind of that ball dominant individual. So it is very hard to, imagine him ceding any time to anyone else. So that does kind of bring me to, my next kind of point. Talon Kinney, he is that mid-range pull-up. When he had the combine back for OTE in early September with plenty of recruits, college, professional even scouts looking at him, he converted on 87% of his pull-up field goals and 76 from his 3-point. So he's very comfortable from the mid-range. And how do you kind of help that out? Is you get a combo guard like Brandon McCoy. And this one, maybe it's a bit of a long shot, but I'm just going to say another 5-star consensus 5-star recruit, a top 20 in both ESPN and 247 Sports. He's a 6'5" combo guard, but it's got incredible length. His wingspan goes up to 6'10", so he's a very good defender. He played his first 3 years at St. John Bosco, so that West Coast kind of connection. Hopefully, maybe Tony Bland has crossed paths before, or will be making some of those trips. But we do have that somewhat of a West Coast type stylistic recruiting, it seems. But he just transferred his senior season to Sierra Canyon. He played the last 3 years elsewhere, but yes, Sierra Canyon, where Maximo Adams a couple weeks back was actually he's playing there, so they'll be playing together this upcoming season. But Sierra Canyon also, a pretty respectable system. Recently, the likes of Bronny James, Marvin Bagley, Scottie Pippen Jr. A lot of these are NBA successful players, but Bagley was a threat in college, a real stud. That's what led him to a top 10 pick. So I think a lot, that's going to be a good kind of tell, and there's a lot of competition with this guy. So that is the difficult thing. He's got offers from Duke, Arkansas, Alabama, USC, UCLA, Miami, Kentucky, Baylor, a couple others. But he has intention to, take all of these visits. He just had an official visit at Bama this past weekend, Miami a couple weeks ago, Arkansas before that, and, Duke last year. But this is not going to be done in the woodwork anytime soon. It's going to be a tenure process. He's going to do his due diligence. So he's going to give Kansas his time. And like any person in the recruiting cycle, they want their time to shine. And everyone kind of knows Talon Kinney just committed, just got the ball rolling for KU. No one's going to jump on the grenade immediately. They're going to take their time. And I think Brandon McCoy could be a sneaky kind of an option for Kansas to get, have an all-freshman backcourt, an all-5-star freshman backcourt. I mean, it's just, and like I said, the way that these guys can play off each other is what really intrigues me. It's because, yes, Talon Kinney is going to be more of the penetrator, the facilitator, whereas you can have a guy with just a rhythm shot, creates offense from their defense too. These are things that Talon Kinney can contribute with, but the first thing he said, what is KU getting from you next year? Fast-paced offense, a winning attitude. They're getting a leader. So, these are things that, just very, very excited to get Talon Kinney, and how it's gonna change this entire recruiting class, because you've got to build a team around someone like that, similar to like a Darren Peterson with, some experienced transfers. There's going to have to be that, hopefully a couple of great returners beyond just this freshman class, I'm hoping. Always a fingers crossed for Flory to stay one more year, but it's a lot of talent is going to have to, I would say, remain with Kansas for next year to really solidify the rest of the team around Talon Kinney. And that kind of brings me into my last topic that I want to go about today, and it's a guy I was really excited about when they got him, and especially at the time that they got him. Last year we didn't have, yes, we had the big splash in Darren Peterson, and a lot of it with him was, he kind of grew up the ranks. He was always a top 5 recruit, but he really did it. He had a great season last year that kind of flew him up the ranks. But getting Cole Rosario in late June, I think, was fantastic. He was a number 45 recruit in the ESPN 2026 class, reclassified up, and he's just an incredible 4-star player. He's going to be young. That's obvious, but he's just going to be. I've seen a lot of videos of this guy, and I think he's going to be a big distributor. I think he is going to potentially take a lot of the reins, and whether it comes foul trouble, whether it becomes people just slumping, sometimes transfers don't always work out, I think you can definitely rely on a guy like this because he's got such a smooth shot, and he just does have a lot of confidence. So getting a player to reclassify and go up that next grade, you got to have a lot of confidence to do that in yourself. And so beyond that, taking that next step at Kansas Jayhawks basketball with the likes of Darren Peterson fully taking on the starting role. I mean, Darren Peterson is expected. He was just voted third in a nation's best player poll, getting about like 9% of the votes. But I just think it's very crucial to have contributors outside of that role, but onto the retention of kind of next year. How does even Taylor Kinney affect with Cole next season? I think he's definitely. You can only hope that he would stay. You reclassify for a year early for kind of the build, the development at that point. Joining two of his other teammates in Samus Calderon and Bryson Tiller. And, Taylor Kinney, that fourth overtime elite athlete now in 2 years that Kansas has gotten. I just think these are kind of the next steps that we're hoping Cole will be taking, but a lot of it is going to be how that transfer production turns out. So in Cole's a very talented player in himself, great three-point shooter. His dad's played, professional basketball in Europe for over 11 years, so basketball runs in the blood. I just think he's going to really benefit from Kinney next year and learning from an NBA prospect from Peterson this year. And it never hurts to have, a lot of tenured guards around him. So Nginyu Ngala, a 4-year starter. Trey White, another 3-year starter before this. Jaden Dawson, another sharpshooter, shooting 7-8 threes a game. Cole Rosario is going to have to come off the bench and really help out and really earn, his 8 to 10 minutes that he will get early on for KU. But I think it's going to have to be a stepping stone year for him on to next year. And, that's where it comes with hopefully Taylor Kinney, maybe if we don't shake out in the Brandon McCoy, it's a returner in a Cole Rosario coming back. Maybe it's a transfer, who knows, But I do think that Cole Rosario would be a great beneficiary of a player like Taylor Kinney joining because he's a great shooter and doesn't always need to be the facilitator. He can be great on ball. Some of these clips, he's picking guys out for these alley-oops all over the place. And I think a lot of it's, just incredible connection and chemistry with players that he's worked with before, like Bryson Tiller. But some of these high flyers, like Paul Mbaya, just reaching up and dropping it right in just easily over him. I just think it's going to be a very interesting year. It's going to be a very fun year now that we've got another top point guard prospect coming out our team. I just miss the days of our point guard running the team and kind of leading by example. I'm a huge Frank Mason man myself. So seeing him kind of maybe meld into that role, he was very comfortable with the jumper. He developed the three-pointer well, but at the end of the day, bread and butter was getting to that rim, penetrating, and finding that last dish down. So I just love how this is the way that Bill Self's kind of mirroring not maybe mirroring his program, but setting his program up again for being a little bit more reliant on those younger, more athletic type players rather than the offensive-minded big man who can be clumsy and have some turnovers at the end of games. But who knows what's on the docket for us next year. We know we've got a bunch of great games, some unbelievable battle-tested players coming to the team, and they're going to have to show up early because, like I said, in our first 10 games, we've got 6 top 25 matchups, including a couple away, one at Chapel Hill. These are going to be tough games nonetheless, couple neutral sites, but super excited for next season. We've got Darren Peterson. We've got Bill Self. We've got Cole Rosario. We've got them all. But who do we have coming back for the next season after that? Taylor Kinney. Get one on the board, Bill Self. That's one for 2026, and we're excited. Rock chalk, baby. Go Jayhawks.